Yes, I'm J.D. Hanson. I'm the Policy Director at the International Center for Technology Assessment. And we have been working on efforts in the United States and around the world to regulate nanotechnologies since 2004. We have had some good success in the U.S. and some efforts that haven't been as successful as we wanted. We have managed to get nanopesticide chemicals regulated by the EPA now. That's our Environmental Protection Agency. We have managed to get the Food and Drug Administration to say that nano food additives cannot be added into food through a process other than the full food additive application process. Right now, though, we're concerned that things like baby formula have nanochemicals added to them, and we're trying to get that stopped. So I could go on, but I think that gives some sense to your listeners of what we're working on these days. Now, currently the big problem with nano is that the definition of what's a nanochemical in the U.S. and the definition of what's a nanochemical in the EU, European Union, and other countries are different. In one sense, the European standards are stronger than the U.S. standards because they, in some cases, would prefer just to ban the chemicals. The French, for example, have managed to get a ban on titanium dioxide, whether it's nanoscale or bulk scale is going to be going through their system. In the U.S., we have worked to get individual companies to ban nano-titanium dioxide, nano-silica, and other kinds of nano-food additives from their foods. We've been successful with one very large company, the Mars company, that makes lots of candies and lots of foods, even pet foods they make. What's going on now? Just as we're starting to meet, the OECD is having their routine meetings, and the big issue there is also how do we regulate in a way that's consistent across countries nanochemicals, and how do we develop our databases of research so that we can compare what Brazilian researchers have done, what European researchers have done, what U.S. researchers have done, and what Chinese researchers have done in a way that makes the research transferable. And I think in the short term, that's going to be one of the big issues internationally, how to demonstrate that, we may have demonstrated to our regulators that this chemical causes cancer, but we need to be able to make sure everybody agrees. Is it only federal regulation? For the most part, it's only federal. There are no states that have taken separate action in the case of nanochemicals. There are states that have taken actions in the case of other kinds of pesticides or other kinds of chemicals. The state of California has taken some actions for chemicals, including nanochemicals. They're used to treat fabrics to make them resistant of fire, but that's really about the only example. We have quite a number of agencies that have something that they're working on nano. We have the National Institutes of Health is a big funder of research for using nanochemicals in cancer treatments. The Consumer Product Safety Commission, which regulates children's toys and other kinds of products, has banned some kinds of nano substances. A device used by people for tracking their exercise was banned by the Consumer Product Safety Commission when it was found to contain nano-nickel that was contaminating people's bodies by going from their device into their body. Yes, I'm here. Okay. Well, as we, in the last, really 15 years since we've been doing the work, we have mostly gotten things off the market, but there are lots of new products that keep coming onto the market. We have our database of nano products in food. We now have over 400 nano additives being used in foods that people can buy in the U.S. This is a problem. and we're having a problem getting the U.S. Agencies to take action. The Environmental Protection Agency has taken more actions than other agencies to get these products off the market, but of the 400 or so products that we've shown them, they've only taken action on about a dozen of them. So we still have the problem of a lot of untested, unregulated products are out there for consumers. And this says nothing about building materials and other chemicals that should be tested, but aren't being. So we are filing, legal petitions in areas that are just the most egregious, most dangerous, and our upcoming legal petition will be on nanohydroapatite, which is being added to infant formula, and we've identified about 6 infant formula companies that are adding this chemical to their formula in violation of U.S. law. Can you ask the question again? Well, the way U.S. law works under the Administrative Procedures Act, first we have to petition the agency saying the law says this, you're violating the law in this way. Then the agency has officially 120 days to respond. In practice, it will take them probably a year to respond. We often have to sue the agency to get it to respond. And so from the time we first start working on something until it's resolved, generally takes about 3 years. During that 3 years, if we're lucky, the more enlightened companies will change their behavior, but there's always some companies that don't. Yeah, so we have worked, as you know, Paulo, with the Transatlantic Consumers Dialogue quite a bit. And last year we held a meeting in Brussels, and one of the things that actually came out of that, which your viewers might enjoy, is a nano cartoon series. Yes, and that I don't know that that's available in Portuguese yet, but I would hope that you would translate it and make it available, because I think some of the work that I've seen in Brazil of the well, it's been produced. The cartoon is produced by one of the French groups, but ICTA paid for, along with the Institute on Trade and Agricultural Policy and ETC Group, for the translation of it into English. So I know that there's an English version, a French version, and just recently there's a Greek version. So I don't think there's a Spanish version. There needs to be a Spanish and a French version, a Spanish and a Portuguese version soon. Yeah. Well, I will see if we can arrange to have it translated with our friends in Europe. I know there's some difference between the Portuguese in Portugal and that in Brazil, but I'm sure you can understand it easily. Well, and so what we are trying hard to do, and it's proven much harder than frankly we thought, to get basic regulation uh, of these new chemicals. Um, it's I can't the work that you've done in Brazil, getting pharmaceutical industry to disclose to its workers what chemicals they're using uh, is one that I've been using as a model when I talk to other groups. But in the U.S., we have had the unions have had to um, uh, back away from some of their work in nanochemicals because in our current political situation, all chemical regulation is being challenged uh, by the new Trump administration, or not so new anymore. They want to roll back all regulations, and so to move forward on new regulations, uh, what we found that we have to do is to move more slowly than we would like. And so one of the, the Environmental Protection Agency was supposed to have already finished assessing data from nanochemicals, but they really haven't done it at all since the Trump administration has been in. So we'll probably have to sue them for violating the new Toxic Substance Control Act, which required a data call in for all of the health and safety data on nanochemicals. Unfortunately, a lot of what ICTA has had to do is sue the government to get it to do what the law already requires it to do. And it was bad during the Obama administration, and it's become worse during the Trump administration. Yeah, all of the budgets for health and safety, have been badly cut, and the the challenge is, I have uh, many friends that work at the Environmental Protection Agency, and just urging them to stay in their jobs until they're forced out, uh, not to leave early, as difficult as it is. Um, you know, the all of our countries have these challenges. That one government will be more caring for how to protect workers and citizens, and another government will want, it seems, mostly just to protect the big industries. Right now, we have a government that wants to protect big industries. Yeah. So, Yeah. 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 Yes, well, one of the things we've had to do, and it may be applicable other places, is to focus on companies. And we have, as I mentioned, we've had some success with the Mars company, a big food company. We are in conversations with the Nestle Corporation and the Hershey's candy company to get them to take nanochemicals out of their foods as well. Um, it's not the easiest way to work, but sometimes it's the only way you have is to use consumer pressure to push these companies to do the right thing. And um, sometimes when a president hears from 10,000 people, uh, president can ignore it. But when a corporate president hears from 10,000 people saying we won't buy your product anymore unless you take these nanochemicals out, they have an incentive to actually take them out. And the Mars company not taking out the chemicals as fast as we would like, but they're halfway through, and they promised to take them out over 5 years, and they are making progress doing that. Yeah, 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 yeah. Yeah, well, I mean, all of the nano uh, industry people, have their self-regulating creeds and principles, but the the real bottom line that we have to keep pushing for are binding laws that nobody can fall below the standards. And the challenge in all of our countries is to see that chemicals are well regulated, so that workers don't have exposure to them, and so that young children. I have two grandchildren now. I don't want those little girls to be playing with toys that are impregnated with nanochemicals that haven't been tested. Yeah. Well, one of the, even something as simple as labeling. It's taken us 30 years in the United States to get the first labeling of genetically modified ingredients on the packages of foodstuffs. And so far we have no labeling of nanochemicals of any sort on food packages. So we have a lot of work to do. Yeah. Well, we're very concerned that gene edited animals not be put into the food system without a lot better testing. The companies say it's just exactly the same as ordinary animals, and to which I say, if that were true, why are you filing for a patent? These are the editing of the RNA and the DNA of these animals. Think of a computer program that we used to type with. Sometimes that program, you say replace, every time it says the word Paulo. The problem with telling it to replace every time it said Paulo, sometimes you want Paulo Martin's first name to be taken out, but you don't want Sao Paulo taken out. The editing of genes the same way. You have to make sure that you're only moving the DNA that you want and not all DNA accidentally. And that's the big problem. These new kinds of genetic engineering tools make mistakes in about 25% of the time. So we have been asking that the developers be required to produce a complete sequence of the DNA of the animal. So that way other researchers can look at that complete list of DNA in the animal and say, oh, but this is not where it should be, so it shouldn't be, this animal should not be approved. So, but well, the problem is, in many cases, we don't know. Some of the mistakes can be very benign and not cause a big problem. Others could cause new disease. These are mutations of the DNA in the cell itself. The Environmental Protection Agency has not been involved in this. We've said they should be, because you could change animals in a way that they can breed with their wild relatives. The Food and Drug Administration is the agency that has had most of the authority for oversight of genetically modified animals in particular. And they want a full review of this. It's the U.S. Department of Agriculture that wants to wave it all through as just ordinary breeding. And they're getting pressure from companies that want to use these techniques in order to crowd animals more tightly together they're planning to edit pigs so that they won't get some diseases. They're editing cows so that they won't have horns. But the real purpose is to crowd the animals together so that the animals are easier to make lots of money from. And you know, we would prefer to see that the Food and Drug Administration approach be used, except they still have to issue new regulations. The way that they've chosen to regulate these animals is to call genetic engineering a new animal drug, and that's not the right way to approach it either. Yeah, well, the mad cow problem shows that very often when we make changes, we don't know what we're doing. You know, in the mad cow situation, they were feeding cattle ground up sheep, and a sheep disease got transferred to cattle where it was then transferred to people. So what we don't want to see is new diseases engineered by these new kinds of genetic engineering. It is possible that before long you could. There's a company in Minnesota that is pushing very hard to get its animals approved, and their first animal is an animal that is genetically engineered not to have horns. There are plenty of animals that already don't have horns, but they want to make it so it's easier to breed traits from, say, Angus beef and put them in to Brazilian cattle that survive hot weather better. So we, by the way, have several breeds naturally bred that can already do that. So, but the advantage of using these new kinds of genetic engineering techniques is that the animals can be patented and the company can control them better and accuse you of violating their patent when they find you have their cow. Oh, right. Well, we have in the United States, two of our largest meat packing companies are now owned by Brazilian companies. One is owned by a Chinese company, and the last one is the only one that's still owned by a U.S. company. So, well, I don't know their Brazilian names, but the companies they bought in the U.S. are Hormel, a big pork packing company. They have bought a large number of smaller meat packers in the U.S. and the big Chinese company WH bought the U.S. company Smithfield. So right now, it's really only the Tyson's company that's still U.S. owned. Yeah, I'd be very interested in knowing what the Brazilian companies are doing in Brazil. I know some on gene editing. Um, I know that some of the Argentine companies are doing gene editing already. There's a joint venture between a U.S. company, Aqua Bounty, and an Argentine company to produce genetically engineered tilapia. Yep. Yeah. Well, the reality, unfortunately, is that, or fortunately, the reality is that traditional cattle and pig and chicken breeding are very successful. And, mostly what we're talking about is not how do we breed something um, more successfully, but how do we use genetics to control our ownership of that animal? And that's more of what's happening to my mind. Uh, you know, now I come from 5 generations of cattle breeders on both sides of my family, and they've bred some very good animals. And the uh, the challenge in the U.S. is not how do we produce more animals, but how do we get people eating healthier kinds of meat. And the companies aren't offering us healthier products. They're just offering us products they can better control. Yes. Well, we are in the United States because of these Brazilian companies that own U.S. companies. They're shipping animals to the United States to be processed in the United States because then they can be labeled product of the United States and sidestep the issue of whether they're Brazilian beef or U.S. beef. They can just label it product of the United States because it's cut up and packaged here. Well, the challenge of the new kinds of genetic engineering techniques is that they're easier to use. Um, and so, an ordinary breeder could use these techniques. The 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 downside is because they're so much easier to use, they also have a lot, it's easier to make mistakes. And so I'm worried about the kind of mistakes that will be introduced into the gene pool from this very quick kind of genetic engineering. I missed some of your question. Yes. Well, you should assume that every, every cattle breeding operation can use these techniques. You don't have to be a national center to learn how to use these techniques. They are amazingly simple. Yeah, I think the real issue is going to be, will the will the people that certify a breed of animal look at these new techniques very carefully? I know that, for example, the Angus Breeders Association in Scotland won't allow genetic engineered or cloned animals in their breed. In the US, though, the Angus breeders will allow cloned animals, and they will probably allow animals that are genetically engineered this way. However, they will note in the pedigree of the animal whether they are genetically engineered or not, just like they already note whether they're cloned or not. And so we will be able to track what happens to these animals. Yeah. Yeah, the reality is, um, most of the research in the United States is being done so we can crowd larger and larger numbers of animals together. There's a dairy in California that has 140,000 animals in that one dairy. Um, you, and this is why they want them to be hornless, because you can't hire enough people to take care of that many animals, at least in the United States. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Now, the next issue that we're following in the United States is the cell cultured growing muscle cells in vats to sell it later as beef or chicken or fish. But they're growing, these new kinds of, it's not really meat, but it's derived from meat cells. And they're using genetic engineered cells to make them grow continuously. And some of the genes they're using are the same ones we know can cause cancer. So there's going to be, I think, more and more of a demand among meat eaters for naturally produced, not genetically engineered or not cell culture engineered, but naturally produced meat. There are producers in both Brazil and the United States that can meet that demand. Right now, the cell cultured meat people are trying to market their product to people that don't want to kill animals, but you have, yeah. But the reality is, right now they have to grow this kind of meat in serum that comes from baby calves. So, and even when they're trying to work around that, but the way they're trying to work around that serum is to use genetic engineering, and I think they're going to end up producing so-called meat that increases your likelihood of getting cancer because of the techniques they're using. Yeah. Yeah. Well, we have uh, maybe another time, Paulo. I do have a PowerPoint on this that I could use to show all the different companies that are involved in this product. So some of the very big companies are putting money into it. Okay. Well, thank you very much. It's always an honor to speak with you. Okay. Thank you. All right. Bye bye.